Okay, let's dive in. There is this frustration, and I bet a lot of you feel it too, with how long things last these days, especially household appliances. It feels like, I don't know, the warranty expires and boom, your fancy new machine just gives up. I was thinking about this because I moved back in 2018, got a new oven, fridge, dishwasher, the works, and seriously, within 5 years, two of them, the control panels just died. Kaput. And the third one, it's definitely acting glitchy. Now, compare that to this old washer and dryer set I got years ago. The dryer was, get this, 12 years older than me.
Wow.
Yeah. And it ran for almost 31 years. And when it finally did break, it was like a simple mechanical part you could actually replace. Not like now where it's the sealed computer unit.
That's such a perfect example of that micro-level frustration everyone gets.
Yeah.
And the source material we're digging into today, it really uses that feeling, that sense of engineered failure, right? Where it's not just a belt or a heating element, but this whole non-repairable circuit board. It uses that as a kind of jumping off point.
A jumping off point for what, exactly? If things are designed to break, what are the sources suggesting is behind that?
Well, this is where the sources take a really massive leap. They basically argue that this feeling, this kind of coordinated decay, and maybe even chaos we see, not just in appliances, but, bigger things, it's actually part of what they call fifth-generation unrestricted warfare.
Fifth-generation warfare, okay.
It's a pretty bold claim. They're saying there's this coordinated, multi-layered conflict happening globally that most people just aren't seeing clearly.
Okay, so that's our mission for you today, then. We're going to try and unpack this really complex, sometimes frankly shocking war news that these sources present. We'll look at the actors they name, the sabotage events they claim are happening, and the psychological stuff too. But, and this is really important, we need to be crystal clear up front. The material we're drawing from today makes some highly unconventional claims, often inflammatory, definitely controversial about history, geopolitics, even health.
Absolutely.
So, just to reiterate, we're here to report on what these sources say. We're unpacking their ideas for you. We are not endorsing these viewpoints ourselves. It's crucial you know that as we go through this.
Right. Consider us guides through this specific set of information.
Exactly. So with that said, let's jump into how the sources define the core conflict. They identify the main antagonists, the group they focus on, as the Khazarians.
That's the term they use consistently, yes. And they don't just present them as a current problem. The sources lay out this really radical alternative history. They frame this group as the central enemy in a conflict that, according to them, goes way back, like all the way back to around 1100 AD.
1100 AD, that's a very long time. And the sources connect this group to major historical events.
Oh, definitely. They don't just connect them. They attribute some of the biggest, most catastrophic conflicts directly to this group. They explicitly claim the Khazarians created both World War I and World War II.
Created them, as in intentionally planned and executed them.
As strategic maneuvers, yes, that's the claim. Which, completely turns conventional history on its head. It's a massive assertion.
It really is. Do the sources offer any kind of evidence for that? For the level of coordination stretching back centuries?
It's interesting. They offer very little in terms of what you or I might consider traditional verifiable proof for these historical claims. They focus much more on painting a picture of alleged ideological connections and continuous subversive warfare.
Okay, so less historical documents, more asserted connections.
Pretty much. For instance, they draw a direct line from this group to the origins of modern socialist and communist movements. Communism, in their telling, is described as a Jewish invention, and they specifically point to Karl Marx.
Right, Karl Marx.
But they claim he wasn't some struggling intellectual. They paint him as basically a paid operative, a trust fund kid even, who they allege was financially compensated to create Marxism as an ideology. A real hedonist, they say.
Paid to create Marxism. That contradicts, well, pretty much the standard biography. Is there any documentation cited for that? A money trail?
The source material presents this more as a conclusion than something they meticulously document with, say, bank records. They state it as fact and then trace the supposed influence forward. Like, they make the claim that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is, quote, 100% owned by Khazarians.
100% owned? How would that even work?
Well, the narrative they provide is that 7 specific individuals, they say 3 women, 4 men, went to China, essentially picked Mao Zedong, and then orchestrated the communist revolution there over the next, 28 to 30 years.
Okay, that's a very specific and, again, radical claim. And in more recent times, who do they identify with this group?
They name some very prominent figures, people like George Soros and Klaus Schwab, are explicitly identified in the sources as Khazarians, and the claim about Soros is probably one of the most incendiary ones in the entire set of materials we reviewed.
What is it?
The sources allege that he worked for Hitler, that he ratted out fellow Jews, confiscated their money and jewelry, and that he viewed other Jews essentially as a protective cloak or even a necessary sacrifice. It's an extremely serious and hotly contested accusation.
Wow. Okay. That leads to another term the sources use a lot, Zionists. How do they fit Zionists into this picture, especially in relation to the Khazarians?
Yeah, this is a really key distinction in their narratives. They describe Zionists not as the masterminds, but more like stooges or minions.
That is rebelling.
That's the kind of language they use. They define Zionists in this context as people who believe in Jewish supremacy over all other humans. Their interpretation of Zion is, quote, Judah über alles. And they'll point to figures like, say, President Biden, as examples of Zionist people they see as favored slaves, who align themselves with the power structure because they want to be on what they perceive as the winning side, the elite side.
So Khazarians as the alleged architects, Zionists as the alleged willing participants or enforcers, that's the ideological setup according to these sources.
That's the framework they present, yes.
Okay, let's shift then to the physical side. The sources talk about this fifth-generation warfare having real-world physical consequences, framed as deliberate sabotage. The Ohio train derailment comes up, right?
Yes, definitely. They are adamant in the source material that the East Palestine derailment was not an accident, not some organic operational failure. It was, they claim, deliberate sabotage.
And how do they support that claim? Just saying it was deliberate doesn't make it so.
They try to use pattern analysis.
Mhm.
This is where they bring in the statistics about derailments overall.
Right, I remember reading that. They talk about the typical number of derailments per year.
Exactly. They point out that, yeah, the U.S. sees maybe around 1,000 derailments a year, which sounds like a lot.
It does.
But they argue, historically, most of those are minor things,
Mm-hmm.
happening in the rail yard, issues with coupling cars, that sort of thing. Usually, only about one per year, historically, required a major hazmat-type response. They use this analogy. Normally, you get 1,000 little fender benders on the road and maybe one really catastrophic multi-car pileup a year.
Okay.
What they claim is happening now is a pattern shift. They say we're seeing major car wreck after major car wreck, these big hazardous derailments, but without the usual background noise of all the minor incidents.
So the argument is the lack of minor incidents alongside the major ones points to something unnatural.
That's the conclusion they draw. They interpret this alleged shift in the statistical pattern as direct evidence of sabotage, of fifth columnists targeting critical infrastructure. The pattern itself becomes the proof, in their view.
Okay, so if they view these events as physical impacts, it follows they'd have something to say about the health impact, especially for something like the Ohio derailment with all those chemicals.
Absolutely. They focus on chemicals like vinyl chloride, dioxine, Fosgene, the ones released there.
Nasty stuff.
Very nasty. The sources classify these as hallides, pointing out they're the 17th column of the periodic table. And their claim is, because of that chemical structure, these toxins basically want to bind to human flesh.
Okay, so what's the recommendation then, if you're exposed?
The urgent advice from these sources is that people need to get really serious about cancer prevention immediately after any kind of exposure like that.
Right. Now, this next part, the specific remedy they suggest, we really need to handle this carefully. It involves iodine, which isn't standard medical advice.
Extremely important distinction, yes. We have to stress this is alternative advice presented by the sources. It's not coming from us or mainstream health bodies.
Understood. So what's the rationale for recommending iodine?
Their reasoning, laid out in the material, is that they believe most people are deficient in iodine. Iodine is also a halide in that same 17th column. So the theory goes, if your body cells already have enough iodine, they're less likely to accept something like vinyl chloride because, essentially, the receptor site is already occupied by a similar element the body prefers.
So the iodine saturation prevents the vinyl chloride from binding. That's the idea.
That's the idea they put forward. The body accepts other things from that column if it's desperate for iodine, is the claim. So therefore, the specific advice in the source material for people living east of East Palestine, Ohio, was to uptake iodine.
And they mentioned some specific materials related to this.
Yes, they referred people to something called the First Aid for Ohio material for guidance on this preventative measure, again presented as their specific recommendation.
Okay. So moving from those immediate health concerns to potential future threats, what do the sources predict might be targeted next in this alleged sabotage campaign?
Well, if you follow their logic about attacking fundamental systems, the sources suspect that U.S. agricultural land is a likely next target, because disrupting the food supply is, a major destabilizing move.
Which areas specifically?
They name a few. California is one, suggesting attackers might go after long-term crops, things like grapes, fruits, nuts, and also try to pollute water sources there. They also mentioned the Grain Belt, Kansas, Nebraska, and northern Texas as potential targets for agricultural disruption.
That paints a pretty grim picture of ongoing physical attacks. But, the sources also emphasize that the real battleground isn't necessarily physical, it's the mind, right? This takes us into the psychological warfare aspect.
That's absolutely central to their definition of fifth-generation warfare. It's waged primarily through information, economics, perception management. It's a mind game. The core claim is that the group they call the Khazarians simply cannot afford for the general population, especially in Western countries, to wake up and fully understand what they're allegedly doing.
Because if people see it clearly.
Exposure equals defeat. That's the premise in the source material. If their operations become visible and widely understood, they lose.
So then the main goal for the forces opposing them, the counterinsurrectionists, as the sources might call them, is simply waking people up.
That's presented as the immediate critical strategic goal, the awakening of the people. Because that awakening, they believe, will automatically trigger consequences for the Khazarians.
And who exactly do they expect to wake up? Is it just people already inclined to believe this stuff?
Interestingly, no. The sources are quite specific. They predict that even people who might be seen as deeply conditioned or resistant to these ideas, they use terms like blue-haired people or Walconians, implying those schooled not to have critical analytical thinking ability, that even they will eventually start questioning things and join the broader populace.
A widespread awakening, then? Do they give a timeline?
They suggest a major shift, a kind of breakthrough in this awakening. It's likely to happen this year or maybe next year, something that fundamentally changes the public's understanding of the conflict.
And is there a specific trigger for that, something that kicks it off?
One specific catalyst they point to is the recent release of, I think it was 40,000 hours of video related to the January 6th events at the U.S. Capitol.
Ah, okay. Why is that footage seen as so significant in this context?
The sources basically posit that this footage, once people actually see it and analyze it, will be the mechanism that proves to the mainstream public that January 6th wasn't what they were told. They claim it will reveal it was a put-up job created by the federal government. That's the phrase they use.
A put-up job?
Yes. And they think this revelation will cause a huge number of people, especially maybe folks in their 30s who are looking for stability and truth, to just fundamentally reject the official narrative they've been given.
And that rejection leads to?
It leads to what the sources describe as the emerging new paradigm. It's no longer left versus right. It's people versus the deep state, or people versus the Khazarians. And the idea is once people realize they've been, scammed or manipulated, they'll fight back even harder. The source says something like, nobody will fight the criminal harder than the one who's been abused by him.
That was a powerful image, but given the scale of the enemy, they describe this shadowy, powerful group operating for centuries. How do the sources suggest this psychological war can actually be won? It sounds daunting.
It's definitely framed as a long game, not a quick fix. Because it's about changing minds and building consensus, the sources say it has to be won mind by mind, person by person.
Slowly, methodically.
Exactly. It's explicitly not like a conventional military campaign with a swift victory. It relies on this gradual process of individual realization and conversion to their perspective.
Well, that was quite a journey through the source material. We've covered everything from, appliances breaking down to alleged global sabotage networks, and finally this idea of a primarily psychological war. It's intense stuff.
It really is. And ultimately, the core takeaway from these sources seems to be this heavy reliance on the power of individuals. Individuals speaking up, individuals acting together. That's where the counterinsurrection, as they frame it, places its bets. On people power, essentially.
And they suggest ways to exercise that power.
They do. They translate it into some pretty concrete political pressure tactics. For example, one source suggests people should collectively flood the email inboxes of their legislators. Not just the main legislator email, but their assistants' emails, too.
Flood them.
Yeah. The claim made is that if maybe even just 10,000 people did that in a coordinated way within a state, they could effectively shut down the state's legislative email system.
As a demonstration of collective will.
Exactly. As a low-cost, high-impact way to show we the people can organize and exert pressure.
That idea of collective action, It brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. The source material touches on this more conceptual, maybe long-term projection. It's loosely described, but the idea is, what if all of humanity, or a huge portion of it, just stopped complying, stopped participating in the usual routines just for a single day?
Yeah, kind of global pause or general strike almost.
Right. The sources speculate that such an act could have a truly massive, maybe even system-breaking impact on the entire human social order, on the power structures as they exist. So the question we leave you with, based on that thread in the sources, is this. What would be the real long-term impact on global power if we, the people, collectively and suddenly just decided not to play along anymore? Something to think about.